the best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Engines are revving, lights are blazing. Singapore is about to turn up the heat, literally. For the first time in Formula One history, the Singapore Grand Prix has been officially declared a heat hazard, a new rule to help drivers stay cool. This means that drivers will be given the green light to wear cooling vests if temperatures here climb above 31 degrees Celsius. Yes, it's hot under the collar and even hotter in the cockpit. But don't worry, fans aren't sweating it. Since its debut in 2008, F1 Singapore has become more than just a race. It's a 3-day spectacle of roaring engines, star-studded concerts, and fringe activities across the island. So why is F1 still the hottest ticket in town, even under the city's sweltering heat? Well, joining us to share more is Deepanraj Ganesan, who's a sports reporter with the Straits Times. Hi, Deepan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Hongbin. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Deepan, what exactly is the heat hazard, and why is this the first time that the FIA has declared such a warning?
Yeah, I think first off, I just want to put it out there that while this is F1's first ever hazard race, racing in hot and humid conditions, it's not really new to Singapore because temperatures often surpass or they reach about 31 degrees Celsius anyway. So first of all, that is not new. But what is new is that this term heat hazard, which was formed actually after the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix, where, conditions got a bit too heaty, a bit too much of humidity, and drivers were struggling. So the governing body, FIA, they acted to avoid a repeat of this scenario, and in came the heat hazard declarations, which has been declared this time around because the temperatures for this weekend are predicted to exceed about 31 degrees Celsius. So the heat hazard ruling has come into play. And what this regulation means is that drivers must decide whether to fit a cooling system or add a 0.5 kg ballast to their cars.
Singapore is a notoriously tough race for F1 drivers because of the heat and humidity on the street circuit. I believe some drivers have called, Singapore one of the toughest race for them. So how does the heat hazard kind of, affect drivers physically during the Singapore race, though? What challenges are unique to the Singapore Grand Prix?
Yeah, to be honest, I think like I mentioned earlier, the heat and the humidity itself is not a new challenge for the drivers. But I think what this ruling does is it adds extra weight to the car, given that they need to carry this mandated equipment, if I can say that. And it's an increase the standard. I think it's about 800 kg minimum car weight limit that they usually have. So we are looking at about additional 2 kg for practice and qualifying, and extra 5 kg for the Grand Prix itself. And, with cars that move at such speed, with every additional weight, it does affect the drivers in terms of them being slower in acceleration, braking or cornering, which of course leads to slower lap times and reduced speeds overall. But in terms of affecting them physically, I don't think it's any different from previous editions of the race because like I mentioned earlier, the temperatures are usually about the same.
Do you know how the drivers are feeling about this new heat hazard declaration?
Yeah, I think there's been quite a mixed reaction, I must say, because being on the ground and speaking to drivers, whether at press conferences or in one-on-one interviews, I think it's mixed. I think there are some drivers who have already trialed the sort of cooling system and they feel that, it's a bit uncomfortable. I think Racing Bull's Liam Lawson, who was saying yesterday that probably won't be wearing it unless he's forced to, because he said it's not the most comfortable. And I think when you're driving at such speeds, right, I think you want to be as comfortable as possible. Anything that restricts your movement or is a bit of a discomfort is something that you probably won't wear. But I think all drivers know that this is something that has been introduced for their own safety. So I think it's something that they definitely appreciate.
And this is what Mercedes' George Russell had to say about the news at the F1 pre-race press conference. Let's have a listen.
We've used the driver cooling vest a few times already this season at the hot races, but obviously this is the first time where it's become mandatory, which I think is good news. Not everybody finds the top comfortable, but I think some find it more comfortable than others. And of course, over time, you'll be able to sort of adjust it to your own preferences. But the concept, I think, it's good. And when you're racing in 90% humidity and the cockpits are getting on for 60 degrees, it's a bit of a sauna inside the car. So I think we all welcome it.
So Deepan, this cooling vest system, how exactly does it work and why might it feel uncomfortable for some of the drivers?
Yeah, so essentially when you talk about the cooling system itself, what you're looking at is basically tubes that are inserted into a vest-like outfit. So basically, I think when you talk about them saying, they're uncomfortable, they are essentially referring to these tubes that sort of are poking at your body, from what George Russell also said. So essentially, it's like wearable cooling technology, and all of the core system components have to be fitted into the cars this weekend. So drivers are currently permitted to choose whether they can wear the vest or not. So I think in terms of the vest itself, it's not so much the problem because it's a vest, but it's the tubes, it's the systems that are attached here that, they find it quite uncomfortable.
Right. I mean, you did mention that the introduction of this heat hazard follows incidents like the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix. So, with these cooling vests that George Russell even mentioned that, they've worn it in the season before, have they been training in terms of to wear that cooling vest to prepare for this weekend's night race?
So I think in terms of specifics in preparing for this race, I think that doesn't change too much because I think over the years, drivers have often talked about Singapore being a hard race, one of the hardest races on the calendar. So they do specific preparations for Singapore, like, spending more time in saunas, cycling around the track itself when it's in the most humid conditions later in the night. But the cooling vest itself, I think I walked around yesterday and I saw a lot of drivers wearing that cooling vest so that it becomes an option for them during the race weekend itself. I think it's about getting used to it. So yes, to answer your question, I have seen the drivers putting it on yesterday, and I think in Friday's practice sessions as well, you will see more of them using it.
So do you think that this first official heat hazard could, influence the way future street circuits are designed, to protect drivers?
That's a good question. I think street circuits-wise, there's only so much you can do, maybe other than increasing airflow around the track with maybe fewer enclosed zones and maybe improving the pit lane and ventilation and cooling. But I think where they can possibly look to do more work on is really the driver cooling system. Like we have talked about in these last few minutes, not everyone is comfortable wearing it. So I think FIA needs to look into how they can improve that cooling system, whether there's better heat insulation in the cockpit itself to prevent the external heat transfer, or maybe even more ergonomic designs to reduce the driver fatigue under heat. So I think these are some things that they possibly got to look at, and with technology these days, I expect in the coming years that this whole driver cooling system will be vastly improved.
Looking ahead, do you think the declaration of a heat hazard will become more common in F1?
I think so, because like I mentioned, this temperature in Singapore is always about the same. And the fact that now it becomes the first ever heat hazard race gives you an indication that this is possibly going to become a bit more common in the coming years. I can foresee, because temperatures and heat and humidity in Singapore is not going to change over the next few years. So I do foresee more heat hazard races in F1.
Well, even with the first ever heat hazard warning, the Singapore Grand Prix keeps it cool as the city's hottest spectacle of the year. Now, since its debut in 2008, F1 here has attracted over 720,000 international visitors and sold out tickets. And I believe you wrote an article about this as well, titled "The Big Question: Why is the Singapore Grand Prix still the hottest ticket in town?" So, Deepan, I've got to ask you about this. How big of a crowd are we expecting this year?
Yes, like you mentioned, I've worked on this piece that's come out earlier today. And in working on this piece, I spoke to organizers and they said that they are assured of another sellout edition in 2025. And in 2024, actually, we saw that it attracted a sold-out crowd of about 269,000 fans over the 3-day race weekend. So I would expect a similar number here in 2025 as well.
Right. I was just looking on Instagram as well. On Straits Times Instagram page, I saw a video of people lining up for the lineups for tonight, which includes G-Dragon and CL. The line was crazy. So what makes the Singapore Grand Prix stand out compared to, classic races like Monaco, Silverstone, and Spa-Francorchamps? I mean, what's the magic of Singapore's GP?
Yeah, and I think the best way to answer that question is by giving you an answer that a newsmaker gave me while working on this piece, is that he describes it as it's not being a race weekend, it's like a 3-day festival. And he said this because he went to the race in Belgium earlier this year, and he was surprised to find that it was essentially just a race weekend where it was just racing on that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Whereas in Singapore, you have fringe events, you have the concerts, like you just mentioned, merchandise stores are plenty. The vibes are really different from what I hear from people who have gone to overseas races. And the fact that it's a night race as well, I think it's just different vibes, gives you so much of opportunities for programming early in the day as well. And really, the concerts itself, I think it's a huge thing. I mean, you mentioned G-Dragon there. I'm not a fan, but, like there are people who watch a wide variety of musicians and people that they want to watch. And over the years, I think Singapore GP has brought a wide variety of artists in. So non-motorsports fan, a non-F1 fan can still be found on the grounds at the F1 race because they are possibly there for the concert, but they arrive a bit earlier to soak in the atmosphere, they stay on for the race, and then they watch the concert after. So it's not just for the F1 or the motorsports fans. I think it delivers for a wide audience, and that's what the magic of the Singapore GP is.
But Deepan, it is expensive. I believe, based on your article, in 2008, 3-day passes were priced from $168 for a walkabout to $1,388 for the Premier Pit Grandstand. And in 2025, these cost $388 and $1,548 respectively. I believe you spoke to motor racing fans, and despite the price increases, they continue to show up to continue to buy these tickets. What were their reasons?
Yes, I think it's mainly because they see this as a once a year kind of spectacle, and it's something that they sort of wait for all year. And F1 fans, they're very passionate. I mean, they follow their teams throughout the calendar in terms of watching it on TV. So the chance to sort of get up close and watch their favorite teams and drivers in person, I think it's something that they will purchase no matter how expensive the ticket gets. And I think for them, I think a lot of them sort of do feel that, it gives them an access that not many others can say that they have around the world. Like I mentioned to you earlier, I mean, when you go to overseas races, it's just the race itself and that's it. But I think a lot of them realize now that with the F1 ticket, you can do so many other things, the concert being a big factor. So I think it's value for money in that sense for them, and it's why people continue to buy, and it's why it's a sellout event.
Right. Well, despite nearly 2 decades on the calendar, do you expect F1 Singapore to continue generating buzz in the next decade?
Yeah, Hongbin, I do think so. I think it's larger than F1 or motorsports, right? I think these concerts, these exclusive parties are held around the city, and you can just feel the buzz in the city every time the F1 comes around. People who may not know much about Formula One, they still make it a point to attend because they want to be part of the atmosphere, and it's become like a social occasion that is a big part of Singapore's calendar of big events. And I think increasingly as well, I see a lot of businesses entertain their clients at these F1 events, whether it's at the suite or some big major grandstand in the F1 experience. So I think it's become a mix of sport and culture and a social event. So I think that's why it's continued to appeal to such a wide audience. And I can see this continuing for the next decade.
And before we let you go here, Deepan, I've got to ask you, what will you be looking out for this weekend? Is there a particular team that you're rooting for?
Yeah, not quite rooting for any team in particular, but I think in terms of sport itself, it's at a place now where, there are 3 drivers essentially for the Drivers' Championship. So I think it's going to make for an exciting race. One of the biggest talents ever in F1, Max Verstappen, has never won the Singapore Grand Prix, which is quite an incredible stat given that he's won practically everywhere else. So he's in the championship title race. So let's see whether he gets this one over the line. And I think something that's going to be exciting for all fans to witness.
Yeah, maybe the cooling vest will help him in this race. Well, thank you so much, Deepan, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Deepanraj Ganesan, sports reporter with the Straits Times. If you want to read more about his article that we've just talked about, it's titled The Big Question, Why is the Singapore Grand Prix still the hottest ticket in town? It's now available on the Straits Times. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
Money FM 89.